It was 1944, and the world was at war. Thousands of women, many of them soldiers and civilians from Germany, found themselves prisoners of war, torn from their homes and forced into captivity. After the chaos of battle, they were sent to camps across the United States, a land they had been taught to fear, a land painted in their minds as the embodiment of brutality and merciless warfare. The propaganda they had grown up with told them America was a land of enemies who would stop at nothing to destroy them. But what happened next would defy everything they had ever been taught. A Thanksgiving meal, shared between captives and their American captors, would change their perception of the enemy forever. As these German women stood in their prison camps, they expected nothing more than continued hardship, daily struggles to stay alive, to endure the brutal conditions that came with being a POW. Their lives had been shattered by the war, their families destroyed, their futures uncertain. Yet, as November arrived, whispers began to spread through the camp whispers about a special meal coming. The idea was unfathomable to many, and rumors ran wild. It's a trick, they thought, another way to mock us. No one truly believed it could happen. Yet she never imagined this moment would reshape her destiny. What the prisoners of war couldn't have known was that this Thanksgiving meal would become a pivotal moment, not only in their lives, but in how they would forever remember the kindness of the American people. The guards, often seen as the face of their captivity, began to speak in more relaxed tones as the day approached. There was talk of something big happening in the camp, but for the prisoners, it seemed too good to be true. It had endured months of captivity, had seen their fellow soldiers starve, had faced the cruelty and harshness of war firsthand, yet now an unthinkable event was unfolding. For many, Thanksgiving was just another day in a long line of lost days, but this year it would be different. On the morning of Thanksgiving, the air in the camp smelled of something they had not experienced in years, the smell of home-cooked food. Roasting turkey, the sweet scent of freshly baked bread, and the unmistakable aroma of mashed potatoes and gravy began to waft through the camp. For a moment, the prisoners thought they were imagining it. This was not just any meal. It was a feast, a true Thanksgiving dinner that none of them had ever anticipated. The guards, who had been strict and unyielding in their roles, now invited the women into the mess halls. The sound of footsteps was different today. Now, instead of the usual harsh commands, there was laughter, a friendly exchange of words, and something the women had never thought possible: kindness. They walked into the mess hall, and what they saw made them stop in their tracks. Long tables lined with food, more than they had seen in months. Thick slices of roast turkey, mashed potatoes dripping with gravy, stuffing rolls, cranberry sauce, and pies, food that had once been a distant memory, now spread out before them in abundance. Their mouths hung open, not just because of the sheer amount of food, but because of the overwhelming realization that they were being treated with respect and dignity, something they had not felt in so long. "Is this really for us?" they whispered to one another. "Can we really eat all of this?" And yet the kindness in the eyes of the American soldiers reassured them. It was real. The meal was for them. It was a gift. For the first time in their lives as POWs, the German women sat down to a meal in the company of their captors, and the experience was nothing like they had imagined. The atmosphere in the hall was calm and warm. There was no anger, no hostility, just the simple sharing of food between individuals who had once been enemies. The women sat wide-eyed as they filled their plates with food that they had long been deprived of. The American soldiers, too, sat with them, offering smiles, small words of encouragement, even a few laughs. Guards who had once stood in cold silence now offered hearty wishes of happy Thanksgiving. This small act of kindness, this simple gesture, was more than the women could have ever expected. It was more than a meal. It was a reminder of the humanity that existed even in the midst of war. It was a bridge between the enemy lines, built not by weapons, but by compassion and understanding. What she discovered next would shake even her commanders. These women, once prisoners of war, were now sharing a moment of peace, a moment of connection with the very people who had held them captive. As the women tasted the food turkey, mashed potatoes, rolls, and pies, they were overwhelmed by the generosity of it all. It wasn't just the abundance of food, it was the thought behind it. The American soldiers had chosen to share something so personal, something so important, with those who had once been their enemies. They had set aside the hatred, the violence, and the division created by the war, offering instead the kindness of a simple holiday meal. Many of the women later described this moment as a turning point, a moment when they realized that the propaganda they had been fed about America, about the people who fought on the other side of the war, was wrong. The Americans weren't the monsters they had been told about. They were kind, they were generous, and they were capable of empathy. The holiday meal was not just about food, it was about understanding. It's about breaking down the barriers that war had created and seeing the other side as human beings. As the meal continued, something unexpected happened. Guards, once seen as the enemy, now joined the women at their tables. The atmosphere was no longer tense. There was laughter, shared stories, and a surprising sense of camaraderie. For the women, this Thanksgiving meal didn't just fill their stomachs, it filled their hearts with a sense of warmth and gratitude. The idea that a nation at war with their homeland could offer such kindness was unimaginable, and yet it was happening before their eyes. Some of the women later wrote that it was in this moment they realized the truth, that the American soldiers, though they were fighting for a cause, did not want them to suffer. They were not their enemies in the way they had once believed. Instead, they were humans, capable of compassion and kindness, even in the midst of war. Many women later said that this Thanksgiving meal planted the seeds of reconciliation, not just between countries, but within their own hearts. After the meal, many of the German women helped clean up the mess hall, something unthinkable just hours before. Some exchanged small gifts, others shared a quiet moment of reflection, and in some cases, they even sang together German folk songs, blending with American hymns. It was a moment of unity amidst a war that had torn so many apart. The guards, too, began to see the humanity in those they had once viewed as enemies. What was once a camp of prisoners and captors had, for that brief moment, become a place of understanding and shared humanity. These women, who had once been feared and dehumanized, were now treated as equals at the table, and the world around them began to shift. As the war drew to an end, many of the women carried this moment with them, remembering the kindness and the generosity they had received on that Thanksgiving day. Years later, historians found letters and diaries written by former POWs, describing that first Thanksgiving meal in vivid detail. For many, it was the moment that shattered their preconceived notions about America and its people. Some even returned to the United States after the war, becoming citizens and living the rest of their lives in the land that had shown them kindness when they needed it most. For the German women who experienced that Thanksgiving meal, it wasn't just a holiday, it was a revelation, a reminder that even in the darkest moments of war, humanity could shine through. For the Americans, it was a moment to show that kindness and compassion have the power to change hearts, even in the most unexpected of circumstances. These women, once prisoners, were no longer seen as enemies, but as people, just like the soldiers who shared their meal. The war had turned them into soldiers, but Thanksgiving turned them into people who could see each other as equals. This is a true World War II story, because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, a meal, gesture, can break down walls, change hearts, and redefine history.